loud. So if you don't want to be recorded, speak now or forever hold your peace.
No, don't speak if you don't want to be recorded.
Good morning, everybody. So as I was saying, as we were letting people in, this is going to be the first of, I hope, a series of fireside chats or interactive presentations. With ChatGTP and having had a lot of COVID virtual events, we'd like to do more in-person and more interactive events as a team. So we're going to muddle through this one where everything's go off the rails, but we want to include people for a question and answer session to give people some more flexibility, to talk about the things that you want to talk about and what you guys are seeing in the market as well. It's a two-way discussion. A lot of what we learn about where the market is going comes from clients doing deals in different places, doing their renos, managing their properties. We're going to record this part of it, and then we'll do the Q&A offline afterwards. So we're just going to start rolling through. What year was this building built? Remember, 1890? We are literally in our office at Ritchie Mill on Saskatchewan Drive in Edmonton.
1892, according to the little commemorative stone next to our
There
fireplace.
you go. It's lovely. Whenever I talk with friends from overseas, they're like, Edmonton's not that old. It's a little bit old. My family found a picture of my great-grandfather's hotel in Bruderheim, near where Luke lives, which is just, whenever we talk about what's going on right now in Alberta economically, I'll compare it to previous cycles. Probably the thing I miss the most about my grandfather is the ability to call him and say, hey, what happened to you in the 80s? And what can we learn from past cycles? I want to do another webinar just about cycles to chat about that down the road. So Luke and I are here, obviously. I'm Chris Davies. I'm in charge of the team in the multifamily sales team here at RE/MAX Commercial Capital. Luke's here. We also have Alex and Mark, who are in the audience. And Mark in particular, I'll probably ping you to chat a little bit about inflation later, because we were chatting. We have a team WhatsApp, and we were chatting about that earlier. And I would be remiss if I didn't plug Mark's excellent YouTube channel.
The Mark Loeffler Experience.
The Mark Loeffler Experience, where he's on there way more often than I am, chatting about stuff like that. So the space bar doesn't work. For those who don't know, we work almost exclusively on selling multifamily properties. We will occasionally mess with development land or pure income properties. Two of the things on there are retail or industrial investment properties. But we like to stay in the box that we need. If you need leasing help, call us and we'll connect you with someone else. But we don't do leasing ourselves. We don't do property management. We don't do residential sales. We just do multis. So in getting ready for talking about the market and the economic larger picture, we pull from a huge number of sources. And there are a bunch of things that we check every day. There are things that we cycle back to less frequently, but we reached out to a bunch of clients and said, what are the indicators you look at most frequently? Where do you get them? What things keep you up at night? And so a lot of what we are going to talk about today is powered by that, but we're going to kind of blaze through the indicators that we think are most important. Everybody's favorite thing to talk about in Alberta right now is immigration. I just came from the Western Canadian Apartment Conference in Vancouver last week before last. Yeah. Immigration is absolutely driving everything right now. I'll get into what it's doing for rents, but I yanked this graph straight off the Alberta provincial dashboard simply because it puts the long-term historical impact kind of into context. I don't know that last quarter was an anomaly or the new trend, but we've never in any of the previous cycles seen quite this level of immigration. We're going to let a couple people in before we switch slides there. The part that's very interesting to me, and we've got this in a different slide in a different app, is that the interprovincial migration, there was a little bit of a blip interprovincially. For those of us who remember like 2014, 2015, when the market and the economy kind of went in the toilet, people moved to Saskatchewan and whatnot. There is a gap in January of 21 or a little bit before that, as COVID restrictions kind of lessened, where people, you know, said, we're sick of the cold weather, I'm moving to Kelowna or Victoria. But all of the streams have really pushed back into migrating to Alberta, whether that's just people recognizing the cost of living or the economic opportunity, or it's our very good advertising campaign annoying all the people in Ontario. It's just across the board. And we're going to break that out a little bit more in a couple other slides, because I think there are some more interesting components to what that trend is and where people are coming from. This was the other version of that slide where you can see there is this like 2020 or 2021. Sorry, like I said, it's a working office. You know, out migration interprovincially, but the funny thing about this one, we actually pulled it apart. And Luke and I have a lot of kids, right? We know this, it's our running joke. The natural increase numbers didn't really change a whole lot in there. Like I was playing with this, looking to see if there's a baby bump. There's a little bit in April 21.
Well, despite our best efforts.
Despite our personal efforts, we're not quite growing it that way. The international migrants are absolutely the biggest part of that section. So that brought me to this stat out of Statistics Canada. This is essentially the distribution of international migrants, and there's not a lot of detail about where they really land, but StatsCan does have an interesting portal to let you play with stats about international migration patterns. The part that I think is interesting is that international migrants, and this runs from 1981 through to 2 years ago, because StatsCan's never on time. Quebec international migration as a proportion has flattened out, and Ontario has come way down. All those people have been going to the prairies. And I actually was really surprised to see BC kind of losing a larger fraction at the expense of Alberta. That's not actually very surprising to me when you consider how difficult it is to find housing. But I think it's a trend that's really going to continue to amplify. And I was surprised that Ontario still receives such a huge share of that. I think that trend is really going to continue to shift further and further out towards the prairies, primarily because of affordability, but also because of economic opportunity. The other fun part of that, again, like I like stats that go way back, is that, you know, growing up in Alberta in the 80s, there were a lot more non-economic migrants or families that were the direct, you know, follow-on immigration thing. The predominating stream here has been economic migrants across the way. I don't have very many friends who like to whine about people coming and taking free handouts from the government. That's a very, very small proportion, like the refugee stream or the other immigrant stream. The vast majority of people are here and want to work. I particularly noticed Ukrainian immigrants just want to hit the ground here and get moving. All the small town Facebook pages I'm part of, easily every 2 or 3 weeks, someone pops on and says, I was a carpenter in Ukraine. I'm here. I want to work. I'll move rocks if you need it, but I want to get out there and work. The other thing that's happening is, you know, so this graph is a little wacky to read, but the bars are the total number of people and the line is the percentage change in the population of the area. So yes, most people when they move to Alberta land in Edmonton or Calgary. They are the largest centers. I was really surprised to see the number of other municipalities that are punching above their weight. I mean, Grand Prairie, percentage-wise, took on a huge number of people, which surprised me. Places like Airdrie and Cochrane and Blackfalds, I mean, Airdrie and Cochrane in particular, are benefiting from Calgary. So Luke and I have said for a long time, particularly if you're interested in cash flow, the commuter towns, things that are within the 30 to 90 minute drive around Edmonton are areas where I think there's huge opportunity. And I'm glad to see that population growth, at least on a percentage basis, is going in that direction. This is where I'll probably tap Mark to talk for at least a little bit. I mean, headline inflation is coming down, right? Overall, we want inflation to come down and be in a normal range so that we can, make reasonable decisions about our businesses and hopefully start to see interest rates come down a little bit. The bond actually was down again this morning. The numbers in the rest of the presentation about rates are yesterday's bond numbers. But we are starting to get it a little bit more in line. I'm just double checking some of the comments. Thank you for the link, Mark. I was listening, there's another wonderful Edmonton-based podcast, Chad Griffiths, who's an industrial real estate agent here, together with formerly from ATB, Todd Hirsch. There we go. They just did a podcast that came out Wednesday, talking about exactly this. And headline inflation is only part of the stories. Groceries are still up like 10 or 12%. Housing's not in there. The rise in debt service to maintain a single family home has been huge. The headline inflation being down will give the Bank of Canada some latitude to kind of hold off on interest rate hikes here. The Fed in the US will probably go up a little bit, but here I think we're going to hold and eventually go down. For anybody who wants to drop me an email and I'll send you a link later. A friend just sent me a summary of all the major banks' expectations for rate increases or decreases over the next year and a half. Most people expect to see some tapering of rates towards the end of the year. Mark, did you have any thoughts that way?
Yeah, just on the inflation in general. I mean, everyone was predicting it was going to come down because this is when inflation really started in Canada in April of last year, right? So it was a foregone conclusion that, the prices year over year, obviously we're down on like oil and stuff like that, right? So you were going to see that inflation number drop. So this is why this is all predicted. I think that they're going to hit their target rate of 3% by the end of the year. And we're going to see some either interest rate decreases, maybe late tail end of this year, early next year. One of the pieces to the puzzle that is a bit of a wrench right now that could actually enhance that or quicken that up is the federal government strike, because that's going to take out a bunch of GDP out of the economy. And if that goes on for a bit, then, that might take their soft landing down a little bit of a notch, right? So, that's one of the biggest things. But yeah, I think inflation, they pretty much have that tame, and at least in Canada. And, it's some of it was transitory. Who knew? We just needed to get, China building stuff again and shipping it, and get rid of the blockades at the shipping containers, right?
Yeah, I think everybody who pays attention, we've all figured out that supply chains have a lot more to do with our entire life than we ever thought. I've learned a lot about shipping in the last 3 years.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think that they think that they have that tamed, and I don't think we're going to see a spike. Who knows? If it is, it's going to be wage inflation that we're going to see coming through, and that could derail it a bit. And the federal government, what they're negotiating on right now has ramifications across the board because, in Ontario, the teachers, all their contracts are coming due. Public service, like big public service places in Toronto, their contracts are all coming due because they've all made it out to this time because they're like, well, let's do it for now in COVID and then we'll figure it out later. Well, now later is coming. So I don't know about Alberta, what their contract situations are, but that's happening here. And it's, whatever happens at that federal level is going to have incremental effects down the line. So it's, it's all just a little bit of fun, and time will tell, as always. And, may we all live in interesting times.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, and I think that one of the things that's gonna, 54% of all the hiring post-COVID, of all the job creation has been federal civil servants. It's a huge proportion of what we've been
Thank you,
doing.
Mr. Trudeau.
Yeah, well, and we'll come back to that when we talk about the MLI stuff, because politics is inherently involved in what it is we do as rental housing providers, as investors. I love the Don Campbell line that politicians can't cause, like, they don't make economies grow. They can only fertilize the fields or poison the fields. Like they have impacts both ways, but they're there to set the ground up for people to do things on. And I think that it's going to get to be really quite interesting in the next little while. I dig it. Okay, we're going to roll back to the slides for a minute, because we wanted to talk about the next part of the world, which is that when you have people moving to town, rents are a huge part of it. Getting good rental statistics is an enormous pain in the butt. Rentals.ca probably has the most timely stats for the entire thing. But it can be tough to get up-to-date information, and they work with a limited data set. We like to get out there and talk with people. The thing that we have seen for sure, anecdotally and within my own properties, has been significant increases. I mean, I bought a property in 2016, and my rents have been flat or down since then. Actually, in 2016, they definitely dropped. And we are only now starting to see real increases. We went up an average of $91 a unit in my building, which is about a 10% increase, which is in line with what rentals.ca was saying for their April report. A couple of the other ones in there that really surprised me: 1 bedrooms in Red Deer, 29%. That's not on the slide. Oh, I'm sorry, that is on the slide. There you go. Yeah, 29% in Red Deer. We're just about to bring 2 little buildings to market in Red Deer. It's huge. So when I'm looking at it in the big picture, as people have been moving outside of Calgary, they typically, I think, have been coming in 2 streams. Either people who are pushed out by affordability, or they come to Calgary, they get stable, and then they move out, or they're being brought there for specific economic growth. I mean, places like Lethbridge and Red Deer and Grand Prairie and Lloydminster, as Shane mentioned in the chat there is a huge manpower shortage. And when they're bringing people in for jobs, they're typically renting.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing in those markets, you've seen a lot of new construction.
Although that being said, in some of those secondary markets, although we've not seen a huge rent bump yet, we saw a huge vacancy decrease.
Big time.
Right? Where vacancy in, I think, Camrose in the last CMHC report was down to 2%, which shocked me.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, and it's across the board.
Rent increases are the inevitable follow-up to vacancy drops.
Which at some point in time, people decide that it's better to go and buy a property. So, Mark runs a residential real estate team in Ontario. When things get expensive to rent, people will go and buy. If rents are going up at the same time, we start to see some interest rate reductions that impact the residential market. You'll see a flood of people kind of returning that way. And one of the other reports I was looking at, when we talk about the number of people who are immigrating to Alberta right now compared to how much we can build, we are only capable in the market of building about a home for every 4 out of 10 families. Wow. Yeah, like Calgary, when they were saying at the apartment conference, when Calgary's running absolutely flat out, they can build about 6,000 or 7,000 units a year. Edmonton, I don't know, 3, 4, 5. We have really great zoning bylaws, but still, we just moved 70,000 people to Alberta. We're not going to catch up to that. So things are moving. CMHC stats are helpful and kind of the benchmark, but the rentals.ca information can be a lot more timely when we're looking at that. So we'll talk about the big picture of the market. I'm going to take a second just to double check the chat.
Oh, I've got it here open.
Dean, we'll circle back to your buildings in Red Deer, because I think the most interesting part of rental increases happens when your property manager actually turns around and says, hey, I think we should raise rents. I will say, coming from a family that did property management, property managers are lazy. We absolutely are. And the biggest part of that reason is that there's no good incentive for a manager who's maybe making 5, maybe 10% of your rent to bump up the rents, right? If I get you a $200 lift, I'm getting $20 a month. What does that do to my bottom line? Not enough, even when I'm scaling it over thousands of units. So when your manager calls you up, as some of my people have in Calgary and in Red Deer, particularly Red Deer, things are moving very quickly. And I think it's really is the following the vacancy. The rents are kind of the lagging indicator to the vacancy. Because we sell apartment buildings, we have to do a little bit of an update about where the kind of big state of the market is. The majority of these indicators I'll talk about here are for Edmonton. We're not necessarily compiling for the rest of the area in this presentation. We have one slide that we'll talk about Calgary as well. We will sell anywhere in Alberta as long as it's a sizable property. And we try fairly hard to track a lot of the secondary centers. When it comes to multifamily data in Alberta, the sources suck. There are just not a lot of really good options. I was hoping I could get the pictures back on the side. There we go. The overall trend, even going into some of the changes this year and interest rates going up a ton out of 2021, the volume has remained hugely strong. People, especially as rates went up, who could have gone in and bought a building in Vancouver at a 3 cap and financed it at a 2, would have been making money there. But as the interest rates have started to exceed the cap rates, if you're in a market where you can't move rents, you're sliding backwards and you have to take on a more aggressive approach. We've also seen a lot of that volume on this slide be some fairly substantial buildings. There are a lot more what I'll call merchant developers who are just building a couple hundred units and turning around and selling it immediately. The fun part for me is that we've already seen a bunch of sizable transactions at the start of 2023 that would have been like late 2022, which means they would have been financing at some of the most expensive times. We're moving into 2023 and seeing a lot more new construction here, a lot more, I'll say institutional or sub-institutional interest. That's not a field we play in a lot, but my initial expectations are that we're going to see overall transaction volume for number of sales and total volume of dollars be very much on pace for the first half compared to like the last 2 years. But I think one of the new CMHC changes in particular about rates and how they underwrite will push some of that transaction volume for the back half of the year. They're going to push it out and push a little bit more of the construction out. So we're going to see, I think, a bigger rent bump as there's less units to take up the strain. A lot of the people that call us are looking for 100 a unit. I want 100 a unit. Mark likes 100 a unit.
In Oliver.
Does. In Oliver, yeah. Give us a great location at 100 at the door. There are a lot of people that I've talked to, even in the last couple of weeks, whose properties that they've had the best kind of immediate return and rental uptick on are in the 150 to 230 range. So they're buying older, better quality properties between kind of 130 and about 185, or they're buying properties that are newer construction, so like 2003 or 2005 through to about 2015. When you can get those, they are excellent, and you end up paying kind of 180-ish a door. A lot of what has happened in 2021 and 2022, the reason we see those averages, yeah, there are a lot of large transactions that are pulling that number ahead, but there's a lot of buildings in the middle, which are families which have owned them since new, that are just better quality buildings that are finally transacting. And we're seeing that in it. We get brought into a lot of families to say, how do we plan for transition? My kids don't like the business, or it's just me. My kids are already grown up and doing other stuff. I want to sell it and use my money now. I'm planning to move to Kelowna in 3 years. How do we handle this? We're going to see kind of very different stratas within the market for the real value add deals. the existing buy and hold inventory, aging new product and true new product. We'll let a couple late people in. There we go. This is the one graph that includes Calgary. And it's actually, it's partially there to highlight a bit of an issue we have with the way we're collecting and understanding data. And I'd be grateful for some people's feedback. The big purple slice in the middle really represents a couple of mixed use buildings that sold in Calgary. And I am not yet decided if I think that a 200 unit building with 15,000 square feet of retail on the main floor is really what I would call mixed use. It's kind of an apartment building that had a one night stand with a coffee shop. But it is interesting to see that even though the high rises make up the big shiny, part of the market, having just come back from Vancouver, I went out to Burnaby to buy some shoes at a friend's place. And I was shocked at how many high rises there are in like Burnaby Town Center. When you come out here, the majority of what we're doing, despite Edmonton having a lot of high rises from my perspective, or Calgary having a lot of high rises going up downtown, the majority of this is still walk-up product. It's a large flat province. We have space for a lot of walk-ups. Financing is fun. Financing is probably the corner of our business where relationships are the most challenging, because we have a lot of people in financing who we love dearly. The level of professionalism is huge. So I'm using this email I get every morning from CMLS just for convenience. But there are several of you on the call and I love you all. The one stat that I absolutely check every morning is where the 5-year Canada mortgage bond is. It was down 9 bips that morning, but we've seen bonds kind of settle in this 3 to 4% range. There's been a lot of variation and there are a lot of things that influence it. But for those of you who are kind of beginning your journey into multifamily, this is the one number I look for. It is different than the 5-year Canada mortgage bond, which is above it. Now the
Canada government bond.
Yeah, the Canada government bond. The spread between the two is not that wide right now. It's about 40 basis points, 45 basis points. But it's had times where the spread has been much wider. The other half of their email, it's great because it just gives you all the metrics in one place and it's very consistent, if not always super accurate. I watch the price of oil very closely. And I like to keep an eye on where they think the spreads are on the residential mortgage rates are. I don't really care about the Bank of Canada rate, although that is starting to change as we do more construction and stabilization work. So we went around and talked to a bunch of people. Most of our people fall into 5 streams. I won't belabor kind of the discussion here, just to point out that a couple of interesting things. When you look at the conventional and CMHC takeout side of the equation, the rates are very much similar right now. The biggest difference is the costs in setting up the loan, CMHC premiums, but it really comes back to loan to value and amortization.
Just having that conversation with a buyer yesterday, who was very used to CMHC having been, a full point below a conventional loan on rate. We had to kind of go through the whole, see a little bit of a decrease, but not much.
And I think
look at these other metrics.
It's one of the reasons I think we're going to see some transactions and some construction projects pushed out a little bit, just while people kind of recalibrate. But I've noticed from some of our mortgage brokers is when they come back and underwrite a property, we're seeing them frequently come back now and say, hey, here are all of the different loan combinations for all the different CMHC products, whether it's CMHC's MLI Select program or their standard rental housing program. And for people who are looking at doing an MLI Select program application where they're not pushing it all the way to a 100-point application, that has some real, like one of my biggest issues in terms of systemic market risk. People who are doing CMHC MLI Select loans that are fully dependent on the affordable rental criteria, it's tying you to rent control in a way that I think is going to be a significant problem in the back half of your 10-year commitment. I have a clip on that in the next, CMHC's got some new changes we'll talk about in a second. I think they're recognizing people are avoiding that, but we are seeing more of our borrowers, more of our buyers and our sellers go for lower level MLI select apps or staying conventional. Yeah, we've had a bunch of people actually go with regular CMHC in the last little while. When you're amortizing, the real difference is the premium for them when you're amortizing it over the cost of the loan. And especially now that those premiums are a lot more similar between regular CMHC and MLI select.
Yeah,
I think you'll see more people go with the old program.
I think so.
Yep.
Especially people that aren't inclined to leverage it to 95%.
Definitely.
If you're not trying to get in for no money down, then it could make a lot more sense.
Yeah, that's not one of my trends in the future. I'm not like people are going to be driven by the 5% down thing. They kind of are, but they're kind of not. It's not.
It'll be interesting to see what happens though, too, because I mean, we're going to get to CMHC shortly, but when we launched MLI Select, or when the government launched MLI Select, the assumption was that Flex was going to go away. Mm-hmm. That's what a lot of people were saying. This is replacing, and to present it hasn't, and it doesn't look like it's going to. So we'll see.
It's going to get a little bit more messy. So both personally and for clients, we're doing a lot more work on the construction and development side. But those rates are going to continue to live in that like 7 to 9% range. One private lender said to me yesterday, they haven't written a loan under 15%. Part of the reason that is going to be a drag on other provinces, but not here, is that it's just so much faster to get a project permitted and through and ready to go in Alberta. Yeah. If you're building 150 units in Alberta, you are well under a year, probably more like 6 months to get it permitted. The other 6 months for making sure your plans and consultants are all good to go. You're 2 years to build, you're done in 3. In Vancouver, you can't get a permit done in 6 years. So you're living in the level of red tape that exists in other jurisdictions is huge and is not as much of an issue here. So paying 9, 12, 15% for 12 months is acceptable. Not enjoyable, but acceptable. So the big news from the 18th, what was that? Tuesday? CMHC is cranking the rates on their MLI Select program. I personally never understood why it was as cheap as it was, right? I put a loan on in 2020 and I paid whatever, 4.5% in premiums. And when this program first came out, I was like, I've never seen the federal government reduce the cost on anything. Like, why is it going backwards? I'll tell you why it's going backwards. And this will go on YouTube, but I don't care. MLI Select exists because Justin Trudeau wants a bigger hat, right? It's a political tool so that when they get to the next election, whether it's the right thing done for the wrong reason, when he gets to the next election, he can point at the housing crisis and say, but look, I built all these properties. And the program has resulted in a lot of construction and a lot of new loan activity. In BC and Ontario, it is an aggressive enough and generous enough program to result in new rental construction. Absolutely. Here, it's just like a ridiculous amount of money. It's just so much money. For most of our people, unless you're skating in with like just not enough cash, increasing these fees is not going to make a huge difference to you. So the premiums, really, it's putting that premium back in that mid 4% range for MLI Select, like 3.5 to 4.5. There are some extra premiums on top for like extra long amortizations, but it just is what it is. Especially if you're doing construction and looking to MLI for takeout, you're expecting other things in your cost base to grow as well. The biggest change here for the moment, between now and June 19th, there is going to be a flood of new applications to try and get in. If you're doing a big project, you have a $70 million loan, it's $1 million extra in fees. Those guys are going to push real hard and have a reason to. For most of the rest of us, or whereas if you're a seller, if you can be flexible and let people apply later, you're gonna solve a lot of problems for both parties. The one thing Nadeem Kefji and a couple other people pointed out, there's, like every good federal government piece of paper, a sentence or two that means a lot. Starting I would say in February, we saw CMHC pushing back on files in Edmonton and sometimes in Calgary, worried about overbuild was the early reason. So you'd send a file in thinking that, average vacancy in the area might be 6%. You'd put it in at 5% because you've got a beautiful project. And they would basically come back and crank your vacancy to 9%. And you don't have a way to argue that. They were just being careful. So the other way they're starting to push back in Alberta, where we have a lot of housing, is they are going to do risk-adjusted underwriting. And like they said here, prioritize more flexibility and just literally work on the files faster when they are based on the affordability metric. I honestly think that that's them seeing the rents move quickly, and the more units that we can get through the affordability stream that have rent control on them achieves their social outcome. It's also going to have the functional aspect of, and not in a bad way for investors, pushing a lot of people back into the standard CMHC stream. It's fine. It's fine. It's a cost of doing business. And in my heart, I wish CMHC had never gotten involved in the multifamily mortgage market, but they're here and there are variables, so we're going to just live with it. Other people will have opinions about that. We'll talk about it at the end for sure. I have a quick favor to ask, particularly for those of you who are doing construction or interim financing. Can you send me a copy of your closing adjustments from your lawyer? Go ahead and redact whatever you want. I want to know the total deal size, the total loan amount, and then all the deductions that happened at the lawyer. Because we walk into these deals and as brokers and as borrowers and as mortgage brokers, we feel like we know what the closing costs are. But we just had a file that when it actually got to the lawyer, there were 13 deductions on the closing statement for a $2 million loan. There's a huge gap in the middle there. Like lenders, lawyers are charging $8,000 on $1 million loan. There's a huge black box there between when it leaves my office and goes to the lawyers and when you actually have to write a check. So please, if you have a minute, send me some of your closing statements from the lawyers. We're going to de-identify them, put them in a database, create a spreadsheet and a pivot table so we can start to understand when you want to take on one of these projects, what's going to happen. And we'll cheerfully share that information back with you and the mortgage brokers and lenders we work with, because it's getting a little wacky out there. So we'll talk about notable transactions that we've seen or that we've done in the market right now. And then I'll give you an idea of some of the places where I think going forwards, there'll be strategies and tactics that make sense. Robin Manor was 20 units, 21 units.
Yes.
Just closed at the start of the new year. This is sold by Savito, which used to be Capital Region Housing. There is a move among social housing agencies to get rid of their old crap and to renovate some of their medium old crap and to build newer, more effective properties. When you can grab these, and particularly when they're vacant and you can just hit it with the right lender, there are very reasonable deals here. If they bought it for 100 a door, they're probably going to put 20 or 30 a door into it and probably see, in that neighborhood, we've seen after repaired, like ARV appraisals as complete, anywhere between 150 and 190 a unit.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. It's a huge range, but even if it's at the 150 a door mark, you're able to refinance essentially all your capital back out. It is getting more challenging, but we're also seeing rents move in a way that means all of our assumptions are guaranteed to be wrong now, just hopefully wrong in a happier direction for us.
Mark looks like he wants to say something. No,
You just turn your camera back on.
Turn your camera on at that moment.
Everybody loves this part. The other thing that just closed is, again, a value add, but this is actually a condo deconversion. When you look at the apartment universe in Edmonton, 76% of all of our structures have less than 30 units. When you look at the ones that are more than 30, this is excluding the last couple of years of new construction. When you look at the proportion that are more than 30 units, they were disproportionately converted to condos. This building was all 2 bedrooms,
Threes.
all 3s with a 1. The other one that we're working on right now is 70 units. It's all twos. We just did another assessment for another one that's all twos. We've got one on the south side that's like 70% twos with some threes and ones. The buildings that got converted to condos are generally superior suite mixes, superior areas, superior unit sizes. Unless something really dramatic changes in residential investment financing, these condos are going to continue to sell at a serious discount. And stealing something from the next slide, I think that condo conversions, deconversions, pardon me, as a selfish agent, work best when you have all the sellers on side from the start. They work really poorly when you show up and try and buy everybody's units, just psychologically speaking. They are incredibly complex. There are a bunch of landmines and there are a bunch of Easter eggs. If you're considering going after condo deconversions, please talk to us and we'll probably convince you to not to. We don't necessarily want to do it ourselves. But there is huge value in the real estate. The other thing that's going to happen is real estate values go up. And we're already seeing this in Vancouver. It's going to make sense just to buy them all out to redevelop the dirt. It's technically speaking very difficult to kill a condo, just the way the legislation works. So there is going to be a growing need to kill some of these condos. The other one we're working on right now is a townhouse complex just outside of Edmonton. This is a buyer and a seller where everybody's just smart. Everybody knows all the tools, but there's value in the existing financing. The sellers are willing to structure a purchase, an assumption, agreement for sale, a VTB, all the options. Or the buyer can just go straight to CMHC, because now that rates are back up, there's actually like not nearly as much in terms of payout penalties on some of these loans as we had originally expected. Part of the challenge in these equations too is though, when rents start to go up a bunch, sellers start to get snotty and want more money for their buildings, or the motivation to sell goes down. But this is a very good example of the types of deals we think are going to kind of power the next wave of sales, is that there are a bunch of people who put good debt on in 2019, 20. I mean, you want to buy my building, it's available. I got 2.17 on a 10-year. These types of transactions are going to continue to power the market where we can find them, where someone has good debt. You're as interested in the debt as you are the structure.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting too to see once people do a couple of these, what the pari passu options look like with these nice lower rates. I mean, when you combine that with today's rates, you're still at an okay rate.
Yeah.
And you've got reasonable amount of debt in your building, because the big challenge with a lot of these is that, you know, they were financed at 75% of the value from 5 years ago, which, you know, makes the assumption hard.
Well, and as rents grow and as values grow, it's going to get better. CMHC's standards for allowing seconds are very high and very complex. So frequently the seconds, like actually getting a second approved, is almost impossible. It's one of the reasons we do a lot of agreement for sale work. There are lots of different ways to handle that. So what do I think makes sense? Like the last one, when you've got existing financing, or if you're a seller, that you're able to arrange seller financing or an assumption. I think lots of those deals can work. They're a little complicated, but it's not that hard to figure out. I need to plug Barry McGuire has run courses about agreements for sale and creative real estate for a long time. His material is fantastic.
Thank you, Barry.
Yep. The significant value add thing, I call it the 21st century renovation, and really,
some of our clients just call it the Loeffler treatment.
Yeah, it's there were very few people doing it in Edmonton, and like including the blowing out walls thing. No one was doing that until Mark decided to punch a wall out. People were going to a new standard, which is, kind of all new fixtures. You're really going back to the studs, but making sure you add laundry in every unit, even if it means upgrading the power. Blowing out walls, running new lighting, doing all new bathrooms, rearranging kitchens. The rents are there, which is like the last bullet point. Like the reason that those projects that Mark worked on really work is there is a huge gap. You had existing rents between, let's call it 800 and 1200, and you had brand new construction between 1600 and 2200. There's a gap between 12 and 6, which is exactly where Mark's renovated rents at a couple of the Queen Mary Park buildings land. People want the shiny new things. They want it at a discount. So they're the Costco shopper who's buying name brand or nearly name brand stuff at a discount. It's not the same thing as if you went into the other store, but you're getting a very similar product at a better price point. And as an investor, you're getting a building where you've really bulletproofed it into the 21st century, because when you peel it back that far, you have to deal with plumbing and you have to deal with electrical, which helps you avoid long-term ownership issues with insurance, with cost of maintenance. You just have to be able to make all the numbers work between A and B.
Yeah.
New construction continues to be awesome. Edmonton has a new zoning bylaw coming out in 2024. Edmonton's already the probably most progressive, development, especially infill development city in North America. For those of you who aren't in Edmonton, I can take a 50-foot by 150-foot lot in the middle of a block and with a medium zoning, put 8 to 10 units on it. In 2024, I could put 12 and I don't have to rezone anything. It's really actually kind of crazy. I don't worry about overbuild yet, but it is going to come for areas where there are too many other mega projects. So I'm very much looking for the infill areas where you're not going to have high-rise competition. You're not going to have enough land base to build 200 units. I'm looking for the white space in the middle. And I think that for kind of everybody's, no matter what type of project you're buying or whatever market is, when you can find white space, like if you're in a neighborhood that's all 1-bedroom student rentals and you can find a building with 3 beds, it's worth overpaying for. It's worth figuring out what your white space is. If everybody has huge units, get the little ones. Like just need to be different that way, whether that's existing buildings or new construction. And condominium conversions, deconversions, I've talked about a bunch. Those stratas first started being made in the 50s and 60s, and the buildings are at the end of their economic life. But if you can run it like an apartment building, you really do add extra life to that structure. You can run it more economically. So that's all I want to rant about. We went longer than we planned for. Everybody's contact info is there for the moment, so you guys can reach out to us, or please, by all means, the new YouTube channel is Canadian Apartment Advisors. Please subscribe, keep an eye on that. We are just starting to roll out materials, and there will be new websites and all the other things that go with it. So for the moment, we're going to wrap it there. I'm going to stop the recording and we're going to let people chat.
For